Hey guys, welcome to Fundamentals of Design, a TUS Plus premium course. I'm Adi Purdila and today's lesson is color theory and schemes. Now, first of all, we'll make a small introduction to color, see how it's created and how it's perceived by the human eye. In the second half, we'll talk about color theory, what it is, and how it's helping us in our everyday design job. Lastly, you'll receive your assignment. So let's kick things off with color basics. Now, our eyes have three different types of color receptors, each responding to red, green, and blue. By combining these three colors, you will get millions of different kinds of color called hues. Now, you've probably seen one of these. It's called a color wheel. The hues we were talking about can be mapped to this wheel in degrees, with each 60 degrees marking a different base color. Three of the base colors are primary colors: red, green, and blue. Three of them are called secondary: yellow, cyan, and magenta, and the other six in between are called tertiary. In discussing color, there are a few terms used to describe the differences, like hue, saturation, brightness, tint, shade, and tone. We already talked about hue, and we'll cover the other five in the next lesson, but for now, try to remember these concepts as they are very important. Now, by combining hue, saturation, and brightness, we can create any color visible to the human eye. But this color is displayed differently in different environments. For instance, the computer monitors display it through a mixture of red, green, and blue, so RGB, while the print industry uses cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or CMYK. Now, speaking of the digital world, I'm sure everyone has seen an RGB, HSB, or a hex code for color. But have you ever wondered why that means, what that means and how a color can be displayed like that? Well, it's actually very simple. RGB stands for red, green, blue. Let's take this example. 255 for R, G, and B, so for red, green, and blue. This one means pure white. So the color has red, green, and blue at full value, 255. So by combining the three primary colors, we get white. In contrast, R0, G0, and B0 means black. It's the absence of the three primary colors. Another color model is HSB. It stands for hue, saturation, brightness. And it's almost the same as RGB, except the values represent different things. Here's an example. 0 degrees for hue, 100% for both saturation and brightness. Now, this one will give us pure red. The saturation is 100%. That means the hue is not mixed with any white. Brightness is also 100%, meaning the hue is not mixed with any black. And 0 degrees means the value of degrees on the color wheel. In our case, 0 means pure red. Now, we'll talk about the hue, saturation, and brightness values in the next lesson. But for now, try to remember what each of these values mean. Now, colors on the web are typically labeled with a pound sign, and each red, green, and blue element is converted from a number to a hexadecimal value that the computer can understand. For example, 0 is represented by 00. 255 is FF. So let's have a look at the primary colors in hexadecimal format. Red will be double F, double O, double O. Green will be double O, FF, double O. Blue is double O, double O, FF. And notice how these are very similar to the RGB format. FF double O double O basically means 255 for red, 0 for green and blue, which is pure red. The same principle applies to the other ones. So remember, by combining red, green and blue, you will get millions of color combinations called hues. There are 12 base colors: primary, red, green and blue; secondary, yellow, cyan and magenta; and the other 6 in between that are called tertiary. To differentiate color, we use concepts like hue, saturation, brightness, tint, shade, and tone. A color can be represented as an RGB code, an HSB code, or a hexadecimal code. Let's move on to color theory. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard about it, and it might seem like rocket science, but it's actually very simple. It's a study that shows us how colors relate to each other and how different combinations affect the environment they're being used in. And since developing a color scheme is a crucial step in any design project, we'll go over some of the most popular color schemes and look at some examples of their use. Let's start with monochromatic. This one will use one hue with various saturation and brightness values. Here's an example. The next one is called the analog. Now, the analog color scheme is created by using colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, like in this image. And here's an example of forest. The next very familiar color scheme is complementary. This one uses two hues that are directly opposite to each other on the color wheel. And a good example is the Squarespace website. As you can see, we use blue and red, or a red towards orange. Next one is split complementary. Now this one is a bit twisted. Instead of using opposite colors like a complementary color scheme, we'll be using colors that are adjacent to the hue opposing your base hue. In other words, it will use one hue on one side of the wheel and the two hues adjacent to its complement. And here's an example of drop bags, who uses green, blue, and the kind of orange towards red. Next one is called triadic. Pretty simple, three hues equally distanced on the color wheel. A good example is multiways.com, who uses yellow, blue, and pink. Next one is double complementary or tetradic. Simple as well, two hues and their complements. A good example is Music Nonstop. So we have blue plus orange that are complementary, and then we have red plus green, which are also complementary. Of course, they are not being used as pure colors. The various degrees of brightness and saturations are applied, but in essence they are complementary colors. Next one is called neutral. Now this one uses muted colors, meaning hues with low brightness values. A good example is this one. As you can see, the colors are very muted, very toned down, with very high degrees of brightness, with very low degrees of brightness, I'm sorry. Let's move on to the accented color scheme. Now this one is interesting. It uses mainly muted colors, except for one color, very high in saturation. Let me just give you an example. Fixie Consulting. As you can see, the color scheme is mainly composed of dark colors, but it does have one blue color, very high in saturation, very bright, that stands out from the rest of the website. Now, the last two are the warm color scheme, which uses colors from the top half of the color wheel with hues ranging from 271 to 90 degrees. So basically warm colors like red, yellow, and orange. Here's a good example. The last one is cold, a cold palette. It uses colors from the bottom half of the color wheel with hues ranging from 91 to 270 degrees. A good example is geticeberg.com. Okay guys, that was it. So for your assignment, a very simple one today, I want you to find your top 10 favorite websites or designs, and for each of those identify the color scheme that's being used. That's all. So next time on Fundamentals of Design, we're going to cover hue, saturation, and brightness. It's going to be a very interesting lesson. Until then, this is Adi Purdila, and from all of us here at TUS Plus, thanks for listening.